So, kia ora koutou, whakaalofa atu, kia orana, nisa vulavanaka. Namaste malolelei, kem na mauri, yaorana, talofa koutou, talofa lava, yakwe, hafa day, and warm Pacific greetings to you all. On behalf of the Centre of Asia Pacific Refugee Studies, I would like to welcome you all to the second in our Talanoa series, Across the Changing Shores, Climate Mobilities in the Pacific. If you joined us last month, welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome on board the waka. Today, we'll be talking about the complexities involved with the decision to stay or to go, migration in the context of climate change. We will hear frontline stories of climate mobility in the Pacific. My name is Olivia Yates, and I am a PhD candidate as well as the coordinator of this series based at the University of Auckland in Tamaki Makaurau, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Throughout the discussion, feel free to engage with the speakers and with each other via the chat box, and we'll be paying attention to that. You can start with this right now by introducing yourself and the traditional owners of the land from where you're calling. I myself am calling from the lands of Ngāti Whātua ki Ōrākei as a non-Indigenous person with British heritage. Today's Talanoa will be guided by the incredible Ray Bentesi, a good friend of mine. So I'll briefly introduce Ray, and then I'll hand it over to Ray, who will be guiding the Talanoa. So Ray is of Banaban and Kiribati origins. He was raised and educated in Fiji throughout his childhood years. His grandparents were forced to relocate to Rambi. From Fiji, from Kiribati in 1945 because of British phosphate mining. His environmental social justice work is linked to the histories of his people and the environmental degradation from mining that have made their sacred land uninhabitable. Ray has an extensive background in local government, NGOs, social work, and youth development. He has worked with the Kiribati Local Government Association and the Kiribati Climate Action Network. Ray is also a passionate community and youth worker who co-founded the Kiribati Aotearoa Diaspora Directorate Charitable Trust and the Auckland Banaban Christian Fellowship Support Hub, as well as supporting various New Zealand-based Kiribati Banaban community and faith-based groups. On top of all of this, because Ray has more time, he currently serves on the boards of the Pacific Climate Action Network, Pacific Youth Forum Against Corruption, and the Pacific Youth Focal Point on Global Compact on Migration. He is the Council of Elder at Pacific Climate Worries, and currently you will find Ray running his own consultancy firm in Ranbi, working towards good governance and social support. So Ray, welcome to the call. Yeah, great to see you again, brother. And I'll hand it over to you now to introduce our speakers and to guide the Talanoa. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and warm greetings from the Pacific, from wherever you're listening from. Charles Enoka to open up this session with a word of prayer. Korapa Charles.
Sina tataro. Te toa me manda maga skaita ko ipukin te meru, skaita ko ipukin te kakapaya ko ngani reno pukin meora. Kino ndala wa kin ndala meru, so pusi ko ntame merori. Mena ira ira me mona ni karakotikina. Have a humble prayer, and we pray for the spirits to be with us during our taranoa and meroro until the end. And we ask for your blessing among every one of us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Charles, for opening this session with a word of prayer. And just before I go on to introduce the panelists, thank you, Olivia, and the hardworking crew behind the scene who has been working hard to make this session possible tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Charles Enoka Kiata, who will just open us with a word of prayer. Charles Enoka Kiata hails from the ancestral home islands of Putaritari, Tarawa, and Banaba in the Sovereign Republic of Kiribati in the Central Pacific. Charles Kiata was bred in the capital Tarawa and migrated to New Zealand with his family in 2002 and now currently resides in Ranui, West Auckland. Charles Kiata has a strong Kiribati cultural background and is always serving and proud to be an Kiribati, serving his Kiribati communities. Charles is a simple community person who wears multiple hats, both in the Kiribati and Pacific communities and organizations, and sits on several governing boards in Auckland. Charles has great passions with skills and experiences in leadership, strategic planning, good governance, and finance for non-for-profit organizations. And Charles works for the Ministry of Justice, and he enjoys serving Pacific voluntary organizations and especially the Kiribati communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Welcome, Charles. And I was so honored to have met you during my time in Auckland. So welcome to tonight's session, and it's such a privilege and honor once again to have you on board.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's an honor for me to meeting you as well.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Broderick Menke. Sorry, Broderick, if I pronounce your last name incorrectly. You can correct that. My brother, Yakoi, my brother from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Broderick is a 29-year-old avid environmentalist and social activist. Broderick graduated from Jaminate University of Honolulu with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies, and has been involved with a DIA community of giants, the Pacific Climate Warriors, among others. Currently, Broderick is the National Adaptation Plan Coordinator working for the government of the Republic of Marshall Islands, and he's very happy to be joining us all the way from the RMI. Yakoi, brother, and welcome.
Yahweh Ray, nice to see you again. Yahweh Charles, Yahweh Olivia, Yahweh Gul, and Yahweh everybody in the room. Nice to meet you all.
Yahweh.
Yeah, so before we start on our panel tonight, please feel free to get a bottle of water so that you can water up your throat if you get dry throat tonight listening, because it's gonna be a very it's gonna be a very interesting conversation. Not just interesting, but because our two speakers come from different contexts. In the sense of environment, where Charles is based in Auckland, and our dear brother Broderick is going to be bringing in the perspective of living in the atoll nation of the Republic of Marshall Islands. So today's Talanoa is centered around the question that many frontline peoples are asking: to stay or to go. Our speakers will share their stories and different layers involved in the reordering lives and livelihoods to move away from the environmental threats. When considering climate change in the Pacific, many people often imagine that moment of crisis, when the cyclone hits or when the wave washes over the island, but the impacts of climate change go beyond just physical environmental changes. Yes, climate change can reform and reshape the relationships that Pacific peoples have with their homelands, and home is where identity, language, spirituality, and culture can come from. So home is basically where families and ancestors can be. Mobility has always been in the nature of Pacific Islanders, but climate change threatens to force people from their lands into an uncertain future and into unfamiliar territories. And being forced to leave home raises so many questions. Questions like, what will we experience at the destination? Will we carry our island with us? And this is a personal topic that I always talk about as a Banaban. And the story goes back to the ancestors. My ancestors, when they were forcefully relocated from Banaba because of phosphate mining that devastated and destroyed the island, resulting in the forced relocation of my ancestors to their new home, Rambi, where I am base right now. And the story of our Banaban people, despite the fact that it wasn't about climate change, it was about phosphate mining. It was about the commonality between the two. It was about environment degradation because of greed for profits, capitalism. And so we've actually been a product of people who have been relocated because of development. And as a result, we were able to maintain our cultures and language and everything that constitute us as Banabans in our new home Fiji, which is about 2,000 kilometers all the way from Kiribati. We were able to maintain our culture and who we are as people because we moved to an island that we bought. And that's how, with the story of our brothers from the low-lying atoll nations, it is the same countries that are devastated Banaba are now also the driving countries that are, creating climate change. And so we are a product of such relocation, and now we are advocating for, low-lying atoll nations. If there was something that we learned from this migration, is the story of the Banabans. And so I'm glad we have Broderick is going to be sharing with us, the frontline stories, as well as Charles, who's got a very broad knowledge about the experiences that our communities are facing while they're trying to resettle New Zealand because of economic migration. But then towards the future, the question is, are we prepared to move? So many frontline communities are actually responding in adaptive ways to ensure that continuation of culture, language, and identity for future generations are there, is our hope, is our beacon of hope for who we are as Pacific Islanders. So such stories showcase the strength of frontline communities while reminding the world of the need for rapid climate action so that returning home remains an option. And for all Pacific people, home is always there, but climate change is the biggest threat. So how do we ensure that? So tonight, I'm just so excited to get on to our speakers to share their insights on the issues and topics and other stories that they have for us tonight. So the first question, which I will pass on to both our panelists. The first question is, what is involved in the decision to migrate in the context of climate change? Example, seeing physical impacts, family ties, and seeking education. And I think this is a very important question that we should be asking in the context of migration. So I'll pass on the floor to Charles. What about Charles?
Hey, I'm the Penny Maori. First of all, yeah, that's my mother language when I say greetings to you, everyone. So Maori, yes, a definition is very simple, breathing life onto you. So when I say Maori, you breathe life to me as well. So once again, Maori, and thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, now I'm gonna get into it. So according to the answer, I thought that I will share a cultural perspective on Ngāti Nation, and I'm going to try to make it very quick. According to our ancestral knowledge, history, and cultural perspectives, we are the people of Ngāti Nation, Nasin Tungaru, commonly known nowadays as the people of the Sovereign Republic of Kiribati, located in the very center of the universe in the Central Pacific on the equator. Our creator Nario means the spider, put us on the very center of the universe, so we are safe from natural forces, tidal waves, tsunami, hurricanes, and earthquake happening around the four corners of the world. Although our tiny small low islands are safe from the tidal waves, hurricanes, and tsunami, unfortunately, Ngāti Nation is susceptible and not safe at all from the water sea rising. A mere tidal wave associated with strong surge and wind during king high tide can possibly wipe much of the islands to be eroded and go underwater. Kiribati is made up of, 33 Addo Islands, so I'm not going to go there. The Kiribati ancestors were known as great navigators and warriors. They are environmentalists and great fishermen, traditional experts, and healers, and etc. This is regarded as the same with the people of the Moana New Akiwa or people of the Pacific. Kiribati ancestors and people have always treated the universal environment with love and respect because environment is sacred and precious, especially important and vital to our livelihood and well-being. According to our cultural perspectives, there are three spheres of the universe and environment that the people of Kiribati respect and protect for living, which are Karawa, the sky, Marawa, the sea, and Tepuatarawa, on Tepe, or the land. Kiribati ancestors and people from generation to generation have and always rely heavily on the clean air, rainfalls from the sky above Karawa, always live off the plentifulness of the marine and ocean resources and richness of the land resources. Nariao's nation is providing and nourishing mankind and living creatures. In the 20th century, Kiribati people became aware and concerned because their natural five senses have been compromised. They heard, they saw, they felt, they smelled, they smell, and they tasted something not natural. The environment has been disturbed and impacted from mankind's poor governance and poor practices to keep the environment clean and safe. Climate change is happening in our very shore, and it is threatening our livelihood and future. So the three spheres of Nariao's nation, namely Karawa, Marawa, and Tarawa, have been affected with the thinning of the ozone layer due to the excessive gas emissions into the air, pollutions and poisons to plants, birds, fish, animals, and drinkable water contaminated with toxic materials, rubbishes in the ocean, and endangering the lives of mankind and living creatures. In the 21st century, Kiribati people and the world witnessed the impact of climate change and the water sea rising, affecting land erosion and low Attu Islands gradually submerged. The international community and scientists forethought that Kiribati is sinking underwater in 50 years' time. So time is running out. So those are the key aspects to tell a story and to answer that question. And I hope I have shed some light into our migration journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for sharing that context, the cultural context. And I'm sure across the Pacific we also share similar context of Pacific Islanders as traditional navigators, and the belief around the survival around our environment is very important. That's being threatened by climate change. So I'll just pass on the ball to our brother Broderick. In the context of migration, because of climate change, and this can be internal displacement where families are actually, moving across RMI just to be safe from king tides, seeing those physical impacts. What are those experiences like in the RMI? Because we do understand that internal displacement is something that's happening right now. Thank you, Broderick.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and thank you so much, Charles, for sharing your insights. It's really great to hear a little bit of similarity between the atoll nations together. First, before I want to start, if I say Yahweh, a little bit of context behind the word Yahweh. Ia means rainbow. Ia means rainbow, and Gwe is you. So if I say Yahweh, it's like I'm saying you're as beautiful as a rainbow. So that's how the culture is sort of like interpreted. You say kind words to each other as a greeting. So Yahweh is you're as beautiful as a rainbow. So a little bit of brief background historically about the RMI in terms of like relocation. it isn't a secret that the RMI has gone through a really massive and also like a globally recognized or horrific situation in terms of internal displacement or like this internal relocation for the people of Bikini Atoll and also other atolls that were bombed during the nuclear testings. So yeah, we've already gone through relocation before with the first world countries. The USA relocated people for nuclear testings in the past. And what we've learned from that is that displaced people living in these places are not they're not usually from are not well off. They are simply put into places that are heavily populated with other people that are already living there and have a lesser opportunity than the people that have always been living there. So it's just, you know, like that notion there in and of itself, it's already it's already like a tip in the wager, I suppose. But yeah, I was just thinking about the question that we were being asked. Why do people relocate? What is out there? Um, well, I was just thinking to myself, it isn't about what we don't have here, development wise, because you know, if you were an islander, proud islander, well, I wouldn't say for everybody, but speaking for myself, as me as a proud islander, development doesn't really do much, but it did give me a lot of more opportunities in terms of like me seeking out education. I came back and then was able to work for the government, all that stuff, but um, I believe that the globe has gotten so small. We are being reeled into the fact that we want a better lifestyle, and in regards to access to jobs and jobs, which equals to money. And I feel that that notion of development is what reels people into the developed world. We already have an existing agreement between the United States of America, of which the Marshall Islands can freely live and be part of the community, except for voting in the United States of America. So that just gives a lot of people the easier access or easier mentality that they can just do that. Uh, they can just have access to that, so it's easier for them to just get into that easier lifestyle because they don't have that here. So I just feel that that's just one example of many, but there are also notions that, you know, like you see here in low-lying atolls, that the people are scared for themselves. You know, they can only do so much for their seawalls or their coastal areas, that they just need to move. They need to go somewhere that's a little better to live in. That the water doesn't get into, or it doesn't affect how their crops. There are things that they just can't control, and is just I feel like that's a huge benefactor to this as well, and that has a lot to do with the climate change. So being the National Adaptation Plan coordinator, we see the National Adaptation Plan, or the NAP, as our survival plan, and we want to make it as culturally exclusive as possible. We are reeling in reeling in all of the conversations that has to do with ensuring that the vulnerable community is heard, the displaced communities around the Marshall Islands are heard, that we don't repeat what happened in the past, and all that stuff. But yeah, I'll leave it there, just to if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer in the chat. But I'll leave it right there, Ray. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Broderick, for sharing the story of your people. And one thing that connects me and you tonight is that story of displacement. It's not something new, and it's something that our communities have experienced. So thank you for bringing those stories on board. I know at times it can be hard to share those stories, but thank you for your courage tonight, Broderick, for sharing the story of your people. And I mean that's especially why this phase was set up because this lesson learned from the story of relocation, despite of the context of how it happened, whether it's because of mining or whether it's because of climate change or other reasons. It is this phase that we should be asking the question: should we learn from the experiences of these people who have experienced relocation in the past? So thank you so much, Roderick. In the context of migration, oftentimes, the decision to migrate, of course, can be centered around economic reason, but it can also be centered around, migration because of climate change. And for this question, you can feel free to kind of share your insights around, what was the decision and what were the sacrifices that you have to make to migrate. And again, I'll start with Charles, because of course, Charles comes with Aotearoa perspective as a Kiribati migrant into New Zealand. Thank you, Charles.
Once again, Kamna Maori, and thank you for the opportunity again. I like to read some of the writings that I prepared in terms of our cultural perspective, and I hope that these answer the questions. According to Kiribati cultural perspectives, the migration journey of Ani Kiribati starts with the story of his ancestors, skills, tradition, and culture and genealogy. It is about making connection to history, land, and people. The storytelling, the history of Kiribati Highlands and myth were passed from mouth to mouth and from generation to generation. Unfortunately, not many written records of history exist or kept and neither available. In the process of migration, many families and relatives say their goodbyes and blessings to those that are migrating from Kiribati to New Zealand. And they do this through a feast occasions to symbolize significance of the migration. When the people of Kiribati migrate or Nasintungaru, they always bestow upon themselves the Kiribati national creeds of the Maori, Te Roi, or Te Tabomoa. The Maori means good health and well-being. Te Roi means live with peace and harmony. And Tabomoa means work hard and prosperity. So those are the national creeds that we bring and bestow upon us as we migrate into another country. We migrate to New Zealand and we bring those national creeds with us all the time. Kiribati people migrate with dignities, cultural values and principles, traditions and language as people of the land in search of better opportunity to sustain good health and well-being, Te Maori, to live in peace and harmony, Te Roi, and work and to be prosper, Te Tabomoa. From a cultural perspective, why we come to Aotearoa and New Zealand? There are many myths, but I'd like to share this one for you tonight. Kiribati navigators and ancestors journeyed the vast Pacific Ocean and may have come from Aotearoa or have anchored the shore of the long white clouds. The oral history talks about Southern Cross stars that lead the directions to our navigators and ancestors, showing them the promised land, the land of opportunity, where milk and honey flourished. There are significant places, cultural sites, and names in Maori that are similar with Kiribati names, legend, and myth. Of course, there is no written record of this account and history because no writings of scripts were kept in those days. But the passing on history through words of mouth was not practical or kept only within family circle and eventually died with history. Some of the decisions when we might make, what are the decisions that we make? We migrate with dignity to become resilience, self-reliance, exploring self-worth and sense of belonging, so to become good law-abiding citizens, and making positive contributions to the economic and social welfare of New Zealand. Migrating to New Zealand in search of employment opportunities, as I mentioned before, we looked for better health system, education for our children, self-development, aspirations, and business opportunities. Some of the obstacles that we navigated and came across during the migration journey of our Kiribati people to Aotearoa, New Zealand, the main obstacles that our people came across is English language barrier. Living and staying together with relatives, thus adding burdens on the cost of living. Many who recently arrived have no driving licenses, unable to open their bank accounts. Many do not understand how education system works, how the health system works, and problems with immigration paperwork. Of course, our people face financial hardship, cultural shock, and the uncertainty of the COVID-19 epidemic. So those are some of the points that I like to share from a cultural perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And huge apologies. I've got to switch because of technical difficulties from my end. And for many of you joining us, you'd see that I may have disappeared from the screen, so I do apologize. But that was a very powerful story, Charles, and just, you know, you being able to share the real realities of, you know, having communities migrating across to New Zealand and having to, you know, to struggle to adapt to the new environment, you know, that is very powerful because, of course, is the question around, is the host country prepared, you know, to facilitate a safe transition of these communities as they adapt into countries. So thank you so much, Charles. And I'll turn to Broderick. You know, Broderick, share with us, what were the sacrifices that you had to make to, you know, transit and adapt to Honolulu when you migrated to study in Hawaii? And perhaps you can also share some of the real experiences that you know, your ancestors had to experience because of relocation, because of you know, the history of your people, which you've shared. Thank you, Broderick.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ray, and thank you so much, Charles, for your insights. Again, like I really appreciate your method on giving us insights, because it's really storytelling, and I really appreciate that type and that style of information sharing, because growing up and traditionally, the only way that we were able to pass down knowledge wasn't through writing on something or taking notes on a tablet or anything. It was through storytelling. So yeah, this Talanoa is really kind of giving us a sort of like a good modern, traditional, contemporary but traditional way of giving each other some knowledge and information sharing from our different cultures and perspectives. Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Ray. Believe it or not, Honolulu wasn't my first place to migrate to. My very first place to move to in the past was California. I moved there and I lived there for about 4 years. This is me straight off the boat. I had no prior intent of staying in anywhere in the United States for as long as like a month or so, but like that was me staying for years and years to come. And it was a bit of a culture shock. I can't say that it was easy for me, but like the first year I was, you know, I longed for my family and the togetherness, and then all the gatherings that we always had. How you know, how full a house could get in certain times. But when I was there, it's very, you know, it's very like I had my own room. I was not sharing a room with like my sibling or anything. And then I felt alone, and that in and of itself just like made me feel for my ancestors or people in the past that were sort of like placed in places that they were not supposed to be. You know, they were left to fend for themselves, not just sort of like in a survival mode, but like emotionally, spiritually. They had to really come back to themselves and then understand what is around them, and then adapt to that community. And that I found for myself as such a really hard task. um, it was especially hard for me because um, California isn't such a slow-paced lifestyle. It's very, everything moves in a constant. And you know, the Pacific life, it's very, you know, we do tasks by you know, husking a coconut, doing this, but like there are other things like, you know, within the house. It's much more mellow than what I had in California. It was very hard, but in terms of, you know, like but but I want to emphasize the notion of our ancestors quickly adapting to situations. And from that I was able to sort of like, you know, change myself and change who I was, and then sort of like change my mentality to really like fit in and to really understand what I was getting myself into without losing myself entirely. So yeah, there's a bit of things that I'm trying to unlearn as well, that I've picked up from living in the United States, because you know, coming back into the Marshall Islands and really like rooting myself into it again, I find myself sort of seeing things that I find as toxic characteristics, and there's a bit of unlearning that I have to go through as well. So yeah, that's sort of like a short story of me just going back and forth, living in Hawaii, living in California. Hawaii was a little bit easier to live in. There were a lot of the Micronesian community, the Melanesian and Polynesian community living out there. Um, it was the culture was, you know, alive and well out in well, it was, you know, that I was friends with a lot of native Hawaiians, or people who claim their ancestry as in within Hawaii, the Hawaii area. So I felt more at home in Hawaii than I was in California. Yeah, that's from me, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Broderick, for sharing those experiences with us. And it's true. I mean, I was a student once. I tried to, you know, readapt and relearn just how to survive in a new environment. But I found out also that with the support services or the wraparound services, if they are available in the destination country, you find it more easier to transit into the new country, and you know, you get to adapt quite easily. So thank you, Charles and Broderick. So the next question, I'll let Charles get on the ball. And the question is, you know, and Charles, you've shared a bit about the importance of land, you know, the ocean, the sea, and the skies. But in the Pacific, land and identity can be interconnected. So how might living your village or home island influence the language, your identity, and culture? What about Charles?
Once again, thank you, Ray, and thank you, the team, for your patience. And yeah, the influx of Kiribati people coming to New Zealand under the Pacific Access category is slow. So when people arrive in New Zealand, they experience life in general to be fast and peaceful. It isn't like what life is like back home in Kiribati, where life back home is simple. It is an eye opener for many of us to face the reality of life in New Zealand, to stand on their own feet. Our people have to work and they have to live. So that's the challenge for them, and that's the reality. They have to work and stand on their own feet. Also, the connections to family and homeland are, you know, limited, and they controlled by the internet, with our securities being exposed. And there is no physical bond, no freedom of speech to express freely because of this modern technology to speak on the device. So those are some of the some of the points that I like to share in terms of our land and identity. So that's from me, Ray.
Thank you so much, Charles, for sharing that. Also, we will try to wrap up in about 10 minutes time, or less than 9 minutes. But we have 3 more questions for the panelists tonight, so that we can allow the Q&A to take place. So this question is for the both of you. What are your people or communities doing right now to protect and pass on language, culture, and identity in the environment or in the context where you are right now? And we'll start with Charles again. Thank you.
Yes, I look at the supporting the migration and settlement should be a priority. A lot of our migrant people from minority groups fell in the cracks at the moment. There's been no service tailored for their specific needs. Immigration advocacy services need to be available in the language. In terms of our people coming to New Zealand, there needs to be a pre-arrival information awareness programs, and there needs to be advocated. So those are some of the system in place that we need and we'd like to see happening. In terms of the support services that we need to put in place for the future, yeah, there's a lot. And as community members, we actively get to meet together and do our own cultural activities. But we have also identified many the needs, like the translation and interpretation for the Kiribati language unit. Also, we also feel that there should be a community hub for our cultural activities and gatherings. Another idea of having the manepa for holding our governance meetings and trainings, workshops, showcasing of cultural skills and performances, establishing our Kiribati play groups, early childhood education, preschool, also transitional housing and settlement programs for the new migrants, and the list goes on and on and on. In New Zealand, we have established ourselves in terms of our community setting. We do have the New Zealand Kiribati National Council, and this body, together with other established Kiribati community groups, have the purpose to meet together and to identify their needs and to play their parts to empower and support their people, especially our Kiribati people and the youth, to be good citizen and in order to be able to work hard and help the economy. So yeah, it is interesting to look at our sector people in New Zealand. We are small, we are growing, and we are vibrant, and we need to be seen and to be heard in New Zealand. So, as a community, we have the ultimate responsibility to identify the many needs and to collaborate with the government of New Zealand. So those are some of the points that I'd like to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And it's always I always enjoy talking with you because of those really important insights that you have, because you are also a migrant yourself, and we've been able to advocate for the Pacific migrants in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But just turning to Broderick, what are your people or communities doing right now to protect and pass on the language and culture and identity in the context of migration? Thank you, Broderick.
Yeah. So it's such a sensitive place to be in, especially with the growing world. Everything is getting so much smaller. The introduction of new and more modern technology is really taking a lot of the taking away from the spaces that we currently have into providing that knowledge into the headspaces of children. What I mean by that is that we introduce technology into a classroom. You learn it by the language that it's set up on. You learn your own language by the way it's set up on. So it's kind of like you're not really learning your language. You're learning your language through how it's supposed to be done. Traditionally, I think the government here in the RMI has established some spaces to really declare and sort of how do we best put this, to really embolden our traditional practices and language into into writing. I wanted to include the word language into culture because we see our language as very cultural. A lot of the words that we speak have different meanings, and a lot of some of the stuff that we say probably don't mean the same thing that our traditional leaders usually say. So we want to keep that the fragility of that work into a priority area, and and maybe one day learn how to really put that into a modern context. But I think what's important right now is to collect the information that we have and ensure that we don't lose what we already have lost. As you have may have learned, our Marshall Islands has gone through multiple periods of colonization. We were colonized by Japan, we were colonized by Germany, we were colonized by United States of America. We have so much that we've lost, and it's not that we wanted to lose it then. We were just forced into a lifestyle that we couldn't ourselves control. So that from that, it's just we are starting somewhere that we sort of had to guess where to start from. And so trying to reel in that practice, it's already a difficult task in and of itself, but I know that my government is trying their best to prioritize our traditional leaders and prioritize their space that they are in, to not let the culture be in a sense where it might, like vanish in the near future. Yeah, come on.
Thank you so much, Broderick, for sharing those insights. And I do apologize for popping in and out of the video because I've got technical problem with my phone. I've switched from my laptop. So yes, those lived realities that you guys shared in the context of migration are real. And the last question would be, in the context of migration, and Charles have shared these, the example of, things that are needed to be done to address the gaps of the experiences that our migrants are facing right now in wherever they are, or particularly in the context of New Zealand. But what support services do we need to put in place in the future for migrants who may cross the borders because of migration? And you can share, some examples, because we've got about a minute to allow Q&A. Thank you so much, Charles.
Yeah, once again, thank you, and Yahweh. And yes, of course, there are many service providers already exist, but I also like to say that the government of New Zealand is doing well in terms of supporting the many migrant communities. And so I need also to make mention that we are actively applying for fundings to support our language maintenance. And I think we've been doing that okay. Now, we also have our language week every year, and that is in the New Zealand calendar. But some of the support services that we also like to see, especially the settlement support for our migrant people, especially our Kiribati and other Pacific migrants. A service hub where they look at our people and help them to transition during the when they integrate to the culture and the society, to help them in their very first 2 or 3 or 4 months when they migrate to New Zealand. Because once we have that hub, then our people will automatically be able to sustain themselves. They will be able to find employment or go on to find their studies. So at Awaka, in our community, we try to you know set up a space for our relatives, especially our families who are staying with us, and we uh, help them with food parcel and also help to find employment for them. So that is only one area that I like to talk about, because I believe that a lot of our Kiribati communities and the Pacific communities are exploring and finding other, and they also trying to establish other providers to fill in the gaps. So that's from me, Ray.
Thank you so much, Charles. Broderick, if I turn to you, what would be that one support service that you want to have in place in the future to support our migrants?
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles. Charles and Ray. I do support the notion of pre and post departure informational guides. We are kind of learning so much from the pandemic here through COVID screening in the RMI. Sorry. Um, Before a person leaves or migrates from the RMI during the pandemic, they have to go through a course or like a session where they undergo a pre-departure informational time where they understand what is out there, what is COVID, how can they protect themselves, and also how like what the difference of lifestyle it is out there. I cannot say it's the same for the USA for them to reciprocate what we are providing for the Marshallese people. We don't have that. I see that Mike Roman is kind of like quite pointing that as well. We don't have that sort of help that our Kiribati brothers and sisters are receiving in New Zealand, which is very, very generous and is such a Pacific way of doing things. And we don't have that in the United States. What we have is, you're given an opportunity to live here and do so as you please, and that's just a harsh reality that we have, and it's kind of like it's kind of harsh, but it is what we have, and it is what was negotiated, and it is what it is, I suppose. Yeah, thank you, Ray. More.
Thank you so much to our two panelists for sharing those stories, from the islands and where they are right now. So right now we'll move on to the Q&A. And the first question that we have for both of you is, how can the diaspora communities and migrants help with climate action in origin countries? I'll pass on to Charles and then back to Broderick. Thank you.
Okay, Kamna Mary once again. Yes, I think for me, I believe in collectiveness. I believe in the we're doing things together. For us to have a strong voice, we need to work collectively. You see, we need to work collectively and need to have a plan, a clear plan in place, and also to network with other international communities, because this is not only our fight, it is the fight of everybody else. So if we are able to be united together and have a common, a common cause that for a fight, and then I think that's the one strategy. I think that's one direction that we can move towards. I'll think about others, but I think that's one for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. The power of collectiveness, that's always been the Pacific way. Turning to you, Broderick.
Sorry, what was the question was about how can the diaspora community help migrants?
How can the diaspora communities help the migrants with climate action in the origin countries?
I see. Well, I see a lot of my friends in the Pacific climate warriors family doing a lot of the work that they're doing. So join a movement, voice out for your original origin country, be the action that you need to be in these bigger countries. We're unable to be there to do so. So be our voice. as we are, we are still the same brothers and sisters. We still share the same, we still share the same native tongue. Yeah, it's just being there and then taking up the space that you need to take up. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you so much to our two wonderful panelists tonight. Joining us from the Republic of Marshall Islands is Broderick, our brother Broderick, and joining us all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand is Charles, who is from Kiribati. Thank you so much. We'll now hand over the ball to Olivia before we sum up the session. Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ray. Komol and Kimna Modi, to our speakers, to Charles and to Broderick. We really appreciate you having taken the time to join us tonight. And also to all of our attendees, thank you also for joining us on a Wednesday evening. Yeah, we know this is not most people's ideal way of spending their time, but we also recognize this as a conversation that's really important for us to all have. Just a few remarks before we close for the night. To our panelists, is there anywhere in particular that if our guests wanted to get in touch with you, they could do so? For example, web page or email address?
I'm going to leave my email and Twitter handle on the chat box, if that's okay.
That's great, thank you.
Yes, for me, I think Olivia, you have my contact. Yeah, I think we'll go from there.
Yes, if anybody wants to get in touch with Charles, you can get in touch with me. I'll put my email address in the chat box as well. And yourself, Ray? No, I think we might have lost Ray momentarily.
Yes, I'm here. So I'll drop my email on the chat box.
Great, thank you for that. And the final thing just before we close is to talk about the next talanoa that we've got coming up. So over the course of this series, we've had a different core theme. We started with recognizing climate mobility, what it is, how do we define it? Today's conversation has been about experiencing climate mobility. And next month, or actually the end of this month, on the 30th of June, it's a Wednesday at 7 p.m, we'll be talking about sort of localizing climate mobility. Given that the Centre of Asia Pacific Refugee Studies is based in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we're going to be talking about the context here. And so we'll be discussing land, law, and te tiriti o Waitangi, the implications of climate-related mobility for this land, for this whenua. Of course, there are implications of this that go beyond these borders, as many countries have settler colonial states with Indigenous peoples who may offer openness or manaakitanga to other migrants who come. And there's a lot of conversations that need to be had around, I guess, the roles of treaties and engaging with Indigenous peoples as well as working with governments. So that's a space to talk about these sorts of conversations. So yeah, if you want to hear about local and national level legislation, managed retreats, and te tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, make sure to join in on the next call. Otherwise, I'll hand back over to Ray to add some final remarks before we close in prayer.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And, just in closing, if there was something that I've learned in this session, is those stories of relocation and displacement. It has happened in the Pacific. There are countries and communities, indigenous communities that we need to learn from. What did they experience? And these are the stories that we, as policy makers and legislators, they need to be listening to these stories, because climate change is already projected that it's coming. It's just around the corner. It's coming in the future. And are we really prepared? Are we really prepared in terms of policy, in terms of social services? Are we ready to take in our brothers and sisters from the remote island nations of the Pacific who may be the frontliners of climate change. And so with those words, I thank the organizers for making this space possible. And I do apologize for the video because it's always popping in and out, and it's not really that interactive for everyone. But just on those words, thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session, which Olivia shared. And with those words, because we opened in the Pacific way with a prayer, we'll ask our Broderick to close us with a word of prayer. Come on, Tata, brother.
Man como dada, okay, chere char. Kamu liru juga codin rainin kan orang minta berako mejar narong kamanelo rainin kanan kalian kamu lalu berorar kanan lo codin rainin kalian kamu lalu berorar organisasi codin rainin kanan kalian kanan kamu lalu kan orang caraman ko pala tongan kait nim kanan le do le tak caraman ko kan kan ini roj kita bukan ke caraman wala pero pedalo kan rumin perin narong caraman ilo yal ko lumiri yung cakal ko claim kamu dok dorang ci kerai. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your sharing. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, nice meeting you, Charles. Nice meeting everybody. Thank you all.
Very much. Yes.
Yeah, it was lovely. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you. Kampasin Rapa.